The morning sun painted the Afghan mountains in shades of gold and amber as Marine Corps Lance Corporal Sarah Martinez adjusted her gear for what she thought would be another routine supply run. At 23, she had been deployed to Forward Operating Base Chapman for 8 months, spending her days managing inventory, distributing ammunition, and ensuring that the warriors on the front lines had everything they needed to stay alive. Sarah never complained about her assignment. While other Marines grumbled about being stuck behind the wire, she understood the critical importance of logistics. Every bullet counted. Every meal mattered. Every piece of equipment could mean the difference between a successful mission and a tragedy that would echo back to families in America. The daughter of a retired Army sergeant from El Paso, Texas, Sarah had grown up around military culture. Her father, Miguel Martinez, had served 3 tours in Iraq and came home with stories that shaped Sarah's understanding of service and sacrifice. He never pushed her toward the military, but when she announced her intention to enlist after high school, he simply nodded and said, "Make sure you're ready to give everything." Sarah had excelled in basic training at Parris Island, earning the respect of drill instructors who saw something special in the quiet young woman from the border town. Her marksmanship scores placed her in the top 5% of her class, but when it came time for military occupational specialty assignments, she chose logistics over infantry. She wanted to support the fighters, not necessarily be one herself. At FOB Chapman, Sarah worked under Gunnery Sergeant David Chun, a career Marine who had learned to appreciate the unglamorous but essential work of supply operations. Chun recognized Sarah's dedication and attention to detail. She never missed a delivery deadline, never made inventory errors, and always volunteered for the tough assignments that others avoided. Martinez, Chun would often say, "You've got the mind of an accountant and the heart of a warrior." That's a dangerous combination. Sarah's typical day began at 0500 hours with inventory checks and supply requests from various units stationed around the base. She would spend hours in the supply warehouse, a converted shipping container that housed everything from toilet paper to high-explosive rounds. The work was methodical and precise, requiring constant attention to detail and an understanding of how each item fit into the larger mission. The base itself was a collection of prefabricated buildings, concrete barriers, and guard towers situated in a valley surrounded by mountains that seemed to touch the sky. About 800 personnel called FOB Chapman home, including Marines, Army soldiers, Air Force personnel, and civilian contractors. The base served as a critical supply hub for operations throughout the region, making it a valuable target for enemy forces. Despite the constant threat, life on the base had settled into a routine that felt almost normal. Sarah had made friends with other Marines, particularly Corporal James Rodriguez from Chicago and Corporal Ashley Thompson from rural Georgia. The 3 of them would often share meals in the dining facility, talking about home, their families, and their plans for when their deployments ended. Rodriguez, a communications specialist, had a wife and newborn son waiting for him back home. He carried pictures of the baby everywhere and would show them to anyone willing to look. Thompson, a motor transport operator, was saving money to buy a farm when she got out of the Marines. Sarah's plans were less defined. She thought about college, maybe becoming a teacher like her mother, but the military had given her a sense of purpose that she wasn't ready to abandon. The 3 friends had developed a tradition of working out together in the small fitness center after their shifts. Sarah had always been athletic, playing soccer and running track in high school, but military training had transformed her into something more formidable. She could run 5 miles in combat boots without breaking much of a sweat, and her time on the rifle range had only improved since arriving in Afghanistan. "You know," Thompson had said during one of their evening workouts, "for a supply clerk, you shoot better than most of the infantry guys I know." Sarah had laughed it off, but Thompson's observation was accurate. During monthly rifle qualifications, Sarah consistently scored expert, often outperforming Marines whose primary job was carrying weapons into combat. She had a natural eye for shooting and an ability to remain calm under pressure that impressed even seasoned warriors. The relationship between supply personnel and combat troops at FOB Chapman was generally positive, but there was an unspoken hierarchy that everyone understood. The infantrymen, the special forces operators, the explosive ordnance disposal technicians. These were the tip of the spear, the warriors who faced the enemy directly. Support personnel like Sarah were essential but not considered fighters in the traditional sense. This dynamic became particularly evident when Navy SEALs began using FOB Chapman as a staging area for operations in the surrounding mountains. The SEALs operated with an aura of mystique and professionalism that commanded respect throughout the base. They kept to themselves mostly, planning missions in secure areas that support personnel rarely entered. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb led the SEAL team that had been operating from Chapman for the past month. Webb was a 15-year veteran with multiple deployments and a reputation for successful missions in some of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. His team consisted of 6 other SEALs, each with specialized skills and extensive combat experience. Webb's initial interaction with Sarah was purely professional. The SEALs needed specific equipment for their operations: night vision devices, specialized ammunition, communications gear, and other items that required careful inventory management. Sarah handled their requests with the same efficiency she brought to all her work, but she noticed that Webb and his men treated her differently than they treated other support personnel. It wasn't disrespectful, exactly, but there was a subtle dismissiveness in their manner. They viewed her as someone who processed paperwork and moved boxes, not as someone who could contribute to their mission in any meaningful way. This attitude was common among elite units, and Sarah understood it even if it sometimes frustrated her. The first real conversation between Sarah and Chief Webb occurred during a routine supply delivery to the SEAL Operations Center. Sarah was delivering night vision batteries and communication equipment when she overheard the team discussing a problem with their upcoming mission. They needed detailed information about supply routes in the mountains, particularly regarding possible ambush sites and defensive positions. Sarah had spent months studying the local terrain as part of her supply route planning responsibilities. She knew every road, every bridge, every potential choke point within 50 miles of the base. Her job required understanding not just what supplies needed to be delivered, but how to get them there safely. "Excuse me, Chief," Sarah said, approaching Webb with a map in her hands. "I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. I've been running supply convoys through those mountains for 8 months. Maybe I could provide some useful information." Webb looked up from his tactical map, clearly surprised that a supply clerk was offering operational advice. His expression was polite, but skeptical. "What kind of information, Lance Corporal?" Sarah spread her map on the table beside Webb's, pointing to specific locations with practiced precision. "This route through the Cunner Valley is faster, but there are 3 places where the road narrows between rock formations. Perfect spots for an ambush. This alternative route takes longer, but it offers better visibility and multiple escape routes." She continued explaining the terrain, identifying hidden supply caches, noting where local villagers had reported enemy activity, and describing how seasonal weather patterns affected road conditions. Her knowledge was comprehensive and detailed, gleaned from months of careful observation and systematic analysis. Webb listened with growing interest, asking specific questions about distances, elevation changes, and sight lines. It became clear that Sarah's practical experience navigating the region had given her insights that complemented the SEAL's tactical training. "How do you know all this?" Webb asked when Sarah finished her briefing. "It's my job to know," Sarah replied simply. "I can't deliver supplies if I don't understand the terrain. Every convoy I plan requires analyzing potential threats, identifying safe routes, and preparing contingency plans. The mountains don't care whether you're carrying ammunition or conducting a raid. The geography is the same." For the first time since arriving at FOB Chapman, Webb looked at Sarah with something approaching professional respect. He asked for copies of her route analyses and requested that she brief his team on local conditions before their next operation. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself increasingly involved in mission planning discussions with the SEAL team. Her knowledge of local logistics networks, her understanding of enemy patterns, and her analytical approach to problem-solving made her a valuable resource. She remained a supply clerk officially, but her role had quietly expanded. The relationship between Sarah and the SEALs evolved gradually. They began to see her not just as someone who managed equipment, but as someone who understood the operational environment. She attended some of their briefings, provided input on route planning, and occasionally joined them in the base gym for training sessions. During one memorable evening workout, Petty Officer First Class Danny Kowalski challenged Sarah to a friendly competition on the rifle range. Kowalski was considered the best marksman on Webb's team, and his challenge was intended as good-natured ribbing of the supply clerk who thought she could hang with the operators. The competition drew a small crowd of Marines and sailors who wanted to see how the logistics specialist would perform against a Navy SEAL. Sarah approached the challenge with calm confidence, settling into her shooting position with the relaxed focus that had made her a standout during training. The results surprised everyone except Sarah herself. Shooting at targets from 100, 200, and 300 meters, she matched Kowalski shot for shot. Her groups were tight, her breathing was controlled, and her follow-through was textbook perfect. When the final scores were tallied, Sarah had won by a margin of 2 points. Kowalski extended his hand with genuine respect. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that, Martinez?" "My father taught me when I was 12, Sarah replied, shaking his hand firmly. "He said that if I was going to handle weapons, I needed to understand them completely. Shooting isn't about strength or aggression. It's about focus, patience, and respect for the tool you're using." The rifle range competition marked a turning point in how the SEAL team viewed Sarah. She was no longer just the competent supply clerk who knew the local terrain. She was a Marine who could handle herself under pressure, who possessed skills that went beyond her official job description, and who approached challenges with the kind of methodical professionalism that elite units valued. Webb began including Sarah in more sensitive operational discussions. Her insights into local logistics patterns helped the team understand how enemy forces moved supplies and personnel through the region. Her knowledge of government and civilian supply networks provided valuable intelligence about potential target locations. Sarah's expanded role didn't change her primary responsibilities. She still managed inventory, processed supply requests, and ensured that everyone on the base had what they needed to do their jobs. But now she also contributed to mission planning in ways that made her feel more connected to the overall effort. The work was fulfilling, but Sarah began to feel a growing restlessness that she couldn't entirely explain. Watching the SEALs prepare for operations, seeing them return from missions with the satisfaction of completed objectives, made her wonder what she might be capable of if given the opportunity to test herself in combat. She had always been content with her support role, but her interactions with Webb's team had awakened something that she hadn't known existed. It wasn't bloodthirstiness or a desire for glory. It was a recognition that she possessed skills and instincts that might serve her well in situations more challenging than inventory management. Sarah kept these thoughts to herself. She was a good Marine who followed orders and fulfilled her responsibilities without complaint. But late at night, lying in her bunk and listening to helicopters taking off for night missions, she sometimes wondered what it would feel like to be on one of those aircraft, heading into the unknown to face whatever challenges awaited. The opportunity to find out would come sooner than she expected, and in circumstances that would test everything she had learned about herself and her capabilities. The mountains of Afghanistan were about to teach Sarah Martinez lessons that no training manual could provide, lessons that would transform her understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. As autumn began to paint the Afghan landscape in new colors, Sarah continued her daily routine of managing supplies and supporting operations, unaware that events were already in motion that would soon place her in situations she had never imagined. The war had been relatively quiet around FOB Chapman for several weeks, but experienced personnel knew that such periods of calm were often followed by storms of violence that tested everyone's resolve. Chief Webb's team was preparing for what promised to be their most challenging mission yet, an operation that would require all their skills and more resources than any previous assignment. They would need Sarah's expertise more than ever, but they would also discover that her contributions to their success might extend far beyond logistical support and route planning. The stage was set for a series of events that would reveal the true character of everyone involved, events that would prove that courage and competence could emerge from the most unexpected sources when circumstances demanded extraordinary responses from ordinary people. The intelligence briefing that would change everything arrived on a Tuesday morning when the mountain air still carried the chill of the previous night. Sarah was conducting her usual inventory checks when Chief Webb approached her desk with an expression that she had learned to recognize as serious business. "Martinez, I need you to look at something," Webb said, spreading a satellite photograph across her workspace. "We've got actionable intelligence on a high-value target, but the location presents some unique logistical challenges." Sarah studied the photograph, immediately recognizing the terrain. The image showed a compound nestled in a valley approximately 30 miles northeast of FOB Chapman, accessible only by a narrow mountain road that wound through several potential ambush sites. She had never delivered supplies to that specific location, but she knew the general area from her route planning studies. "What's the target?" Sarah asked, though she knew Webb could only share certain details with someone at her clearance level. "Taliban commander who's been coordinating attacks against coalition forces throughout the region," Webb replied. "Intelligence suggests he's planning something big, potentially targeting this base. We need to move fast, but the approach is complicated." Webb explained that the compound was situated in a way that made traditional assault approaches extremely difficult. The valley offered only one viable entrance, and that route could be easily defended by a small number of fighters with basic weapons. Air support would be limited due to the terrain and the proximity of civilian settlements. "The mission requires a 12-man team," Webb continued. 6 SEALs plus 6 additional personnel for security and logistics support. "We'll be operating independently for potentially 72 hours, which means carrying everything we need or establishing supply caches along the route." Sarah nodded, already beginning to analyze the logistical requirements in her mind. A 12-man team operating independently for 3 days would need substantial supplies: food, water, ammunition, medical equipment, communications gear, and backup equipment for critical systems. The weight would be significant, especially considering the mountainous terrain they would have to traverse. "What's the timeline?" Sarah asked. "We launch tomorrow night," Webb said, "which is why I need your expertise on route planning and supply calculations. The success of this mission depends on getting the details right." Over the next several hours, Sarah worked with Webb and his team to develop a comprehensive logistical plan. They calculated weight requirements down to the ounce, identified potential water sources along the route, and planned contingency supplies in case the mission extended beyond the anticipated timeline. Sarah's knowledge of local terrain proved invaluable in identifying cache locations where supplies could be prepositioned. She had spent months studying topographical maps, and her understanding of how weather patterns affected mountain roads helped the team plan their movement schedule. During the planning session, Sarah noticed that the SEAL team was short one member due to a medical evacuation earlier in the week. Petty Officer Second Class Martinez, no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname, had been flown to Germany for emergency surgery after a training accident. The team would be operating with 5 SEALs instead of 6, which created both tactical and logistical complications. "We could request additional personnel from Bugram," suggested Petty Officer Kowalski, "but that would delay the mission by at least 48 hours. Webb shook his head. "Intelligence indicates the target will be moving soon. If we wait for reinforcements, we lose the opportunity." The discussion continued for another hour, with various options being considered and discarded. Additional Marine personnel were available, but they lacked the specialized training necessary for the mission. Civilian contractors had the technical skills, but couldn't be used in direct combat operations. As the meeting concluded, Sarah found herself thinking about the personnel shortage and its implications for mission success. She had been involved in enough planning sessions to understand how critical proper manning was for complex operations. One missing person could create vulnerabilities that put the entire team at risk. That evening, Sarah sat in the dining facility with Rodriguez and Thompson, discussing the upcoming mission in general terms. She couldn't share specific details, but her friends could see that something significant was being planned. "You've been spending a lot of time with the SEAL team lately," Thompson observed. "Are you thinking about changing your military occupational specialty?" Sarah had been wondering the same thing herself. Her work with Webb's team had shown her aspects of military service that she found intellectually challenging and emotionally satisfying. The precision required for mission planning, the attention to detail necessary for successful operations, and the sense of purpose that came from directly supporting critical objectives appealed to her in ways that routine supply management did not. I don't know, Sarah replied honestly. I never thought about doing anything other than logistics, but working with them has shown me different possibilities. Rodriguez laughed. Supply clerk to Navy SEAL? That's quite a career change. I'm not talking about becoming a SEAL, Sarah clarified. But there are other specialties that involve more direct operational support. Intelligence analysis, special operations logistics, maybe even reconnaissance. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of helicopters approaching the landing zone. Night missions were common at FOB Chapman, but something about the urgent sound of the rotors suggested that this was not a routine operation. The three Marines finished their meal quickly and returned to their respective units to see if they would be needed for any support activities. Sarah spent the rest of the evening reviewing supply manifests and double-checking equipment allocations for the SEAL mission. Everything needed to be perfect because there would be no opportunity for corrections once the team departed. She worked late into the night, ensuring that every piece of gear was accounted for and properly configured. The next morning brought news that would fundamentally alter the mission parameters. Intelligence updates indicated that the target compound was more heavily defended than initially believed, and that the Taliban commander had recently been joined by several foreign fighters with advanced weapons training. The threat level had increased significantly, but the strategic importance of the target made the mission even more critical. Chief Webb called an emergency briefing for all personnel involved in the operation. Sarah attended in her capacity as logistics coordinator, but she sensed that something had changed in the overall mission planning. Webb's expression was grimmer than usual, and the other SEALs seemed more focused than she had ever seen them. The situation has evolved. Webb began without preamble. Our target has been reinforced, and we now estimate 12 to 15 enemy fighters at the compound. Additionally, intelligence suggests they have acquired anti-aircraft weapons, which limits our air support options. Webb continued explaining how the changed circumstances affected their tactical approach. The team would need to carry additional ammunition and specialized equipment for dealing with hardened positions. The weight requirements had increased substantially, and the margin for error had decreased proportionally. Sir, Kowalski interrupted. With respect, 5 operators might not be sufficient for this mission profile. The numbers don't add up favorably. Webb nodded grimly. I've been thinking the same thing. But we can't delay the operation, and we can't get additional SEAL personnel in time. We need to consider alternative solutions. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the implications. Sarah found herself analyzing the problem from a logistical perspective, considering what resources might be available to supplement the team's capabilities. As she mentally reviewed the personnel roster at FOB Chapman, an idea began to form that was both logical and audacious. Chief Webb, Sarah said, surprised by the sound of her own voice interrupting the silence. What if you didn't need another SEAL? What if you just needed another qualified operator? Webb looked at her with puzzlement. What do you mean, Martinez? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to propose would either be dismissed immediately or change the course of her military career. I mean that I might be able to fill the personnel gap. I know the terrain better than anyone else available. I can handle the logistics requirements in the field, and I'm qualified on all the weapons systems the team uses. The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Sarah could see the other SEALs exchanging glances that ranged from surprise to skepticism. She knew that what she was proposing was unprecedented, a supply clerk volunteering to join a special operations mission. But she also knew that her skills and knowledge made her uniquely qualified to contribute. Webb studied Sarah's face for a long moment, clearly weighing her proposal against standard operating procedures and mission requirements. Martinez, this isn't a convoy escort or a base security patrol. This is a direct action mission against a hardened target in denied terrain. Are you fully aware of what you're volunteering for? Yes, Chief, Sarah replied with quiet confidence. I understand the risks, and I understand the requirements. But I also understand that mission success depends on having the right people with the right skills in the right positions. I can contribute to this mission in ways that go beyond my official job description. Petty Officer Kowalski leaned forward in his chair. Martinez, with all due respect, you're a supply clerk. This mission requires combat experience and specialized training that takes years to develop. Sarah met Kowalski's gaze steadily. You're right that I don't have combat experience. But I do have skills that are relevant to this mission. I know every inch of the terrain you'll be operating in. I can calculate load requirements and movement timelines better than anyone else on this base. And I can shoot as well as anyone in this room. She paused, organizing her thoughts before continuing. I'm not trying to pretend I'm something I'm not. But I am trying to offer capabilities that might help ensure mission success. If you need someone who can handle logistics in the field, provide route planning expertise, and contribute to the team's fighting capability when necessary, then I can do that. Chief Webb was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with a decision that had no clear precedent. Adding a non-SEAL to a special operations mission violated standard procedures, but the circumstances were hardly standard. The mission was critical, time was limited, and conventional solutions were not available. Let me ask you something, Martinez, Webb finally said. If we're in that compound and things go sideways, if we're taking fire from multiple positions and people are getting hit, can you handle that? Can you function under that kind of pressure? Sarah considered the question seriously before answering. She thought about her father's stories of combat, about the training she had received, about her own response to stressful situations during her military service. She couldn't know with certainty how she would react to combat, but she had confidence in her ability to remain calm and focused when others depended on her. Chief, I can't promise that I'll be perfect, Sarah said. But I can promise that I'll do my job, follow orders, and support the mission regardless of what happens. That's what Marines do. Webb nodded slowly, apparently satisfied with her answer. All right, Martinez. Here's what we're going to do. You have 12 hours to prove that you can operate at the level this mission requires. We're going to put you through an abbreviated version of our training pipeline. If you can handle it, we'll discuss including you in the mission. If you can't, we go with 5 operators and adjust our tactics accordingly. The next 12 hours would be unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced in her military career. The SEALs put her through a compressed version of their selection and training process, testing her physical conditioning, her ability to handle stress, her proficiency with various weapons systems, and her capacity to think clearly under pressure. The physical training was grueling. Sarah found herself running miles through mountain terrain while carrying a 60-pound pack, conducting buddy carries with teammates twice her size, and performing complex tasks while physically exhausted. Her soccer background and military conditioning served her well, but the intensity was beyond anything she had previously experienced. The weapons training revealed both her strengths and her limitations. Sarah's marksmanship skills were indeed exceptional, but she had never used some of the specialized equipment that SEAL teams employed. She spent hours learning to operate night vision devices, communication systems, and demolition equipment under the patient instruction of Webb's team members. Perhaps most challenging was the tactical training. Sarah had to learn to think like an operator rather than a support person, to consider how her actions would affect the team's overall mission, and to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between success and failure. The SEALs created scenario after scenario, forcing her to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining mission focus. As the training session progressed, Sarah began to understand why SEAL selection was so rigorous and why the teams were so effective. Every aspect of their operations required precise coordination, absolute trust between team members, and the ability to perform complex tasks under extreme stress. She was being asked to compress years of training into a few hours, and the challenge was both daunting and exhilarating. By the end of the 12-hour evaluation, Sarah was physically exhausted but mentally energized. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she hadn't known existed, and she had earned the grudging respect of operators who had initially viewed her as an unqualified volunteer. Chief Webb called her aside for a private conversation as the training concluded. Martinez, you've surprised everyone today, including me. You've shown that you have the physical capability and the mental toughness to contribute to this mission. But I need to ask you one more time. Are you absolutely certain that this is what you want to do? Sarah looked at Webb with clear eyes and steady voice. Chief, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. This mission matters, and I can help make it successful. That's all the reason I need. Webb extended his hand to Sarah with a smile that mixed respect with concern. Welcome to the team, Martinez. Try not to make me regret this decision. The mission launched at 2,200 hours under a moonless sky that provided perfect concealment for their movement. Sarah found herself sitting in the back of a Black Hawk helicopter, wearing gear that had been hastily modified to fit her smaller frame, surrounded by operators who had accepted her presence but remained skeptical about her untested capabilities. The flight to the insertion point took 45 minutes, following a route that Sarah had helped plan to avoid known enemy positions and minimize exposure to potential ground fire. As they flew through the mountain valleys, Sarah reviewed the mission timeline in her mind, double-checking equipment loads and contingency plans. The SEAL team would insert approximately 3 miles from the target compound and approach on foot through terrain that Sarah knew better than any of them. Her role was multifaceted: serve as the team's logistics coordinator, provide route guidance based on her extensive knowledge of local geography, and function as an additional shooter when the tactical situation required it. Chief Webb had made it clear that Sarah would initially operate in a support role, handling communications with the base and managing their supply requirements during the extended operation. However, he had also equipped her with the same weapons and equipment carried by the other team members, acknowledging that circumstances might require her to function as a combatant. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with the aircraft touching down just long enough for the 6-person team to exit before disappearing back into the night sky. Sarah found herself standing in a rocky clearing surrounded by mountains that seemed to reach toward the stars, wearing night vision goggles that transformed the landscape into an eerie green panorama. Martinez, take point on navigation, Webb whispered through the communication system. Guide us to checkpoint Alpha using the route we discussed. Sarah consulted her map and compass, orienting herself to the terrain features that she had studied extensively during mission planning. The route to their first checkpoint involved crossing a valley, climbing through a narrow pass, and traversing a ridge line that would provide observation of their target area. Moving through mountain terrain at night with a full combat load was more challenging than anything Sarah had experienced during her training period. Every step had to be calculated to avoid making noise. Every movement had to consider how it would affect the team's overall signature, and every decision had to balance speed against security. The team made good progress for the first hour, covering nearly 2 miles while remaining undetected. Sarah's navigation proved accurate, and her knowledge of local terrain helped them avoid several areas where loose rock could have created noise discipline problems. The SEALs moved with the fluid precision that came from years of training and operational experience. As they approached their first checkpoint, Sarah noticed something that didn't match her expectations based on previous intelligence reports. The valley below showed signs of recent vehicle traffic, with tire tracks visible in the soft earth near a small stream. More significantly, there were light signatures in areas that were supposed to be uninhabited. Chief, we've got activity down there that wasn't in the intelligence briefing, Sarah reported quietly through her headset. Webb moved up to Sarah's position and studied the valley through his night vision scope. The light signatures were faint but clearly artificial, suggesting the presence of personnel who were trying to maintain concealment while conducting nighttime activities. Could be shepherds, suggested Kowalski, who had joined them at the observation point. Locals sometimes move their flocks at night during summer months. Sarah shook her head. Not this time of year, and not in this location. The grazing areas are at lower elevations. Those lights are in positions that provide observation of the road leading to our target area. Webb studied the scene for several more minutes before making a decision that would fundamentally alter their mission approach. Martinez is right. Those are security positions. Our target has established early warning posts that weren't identified in the intelligence preparation. The discovery of additional enemy positions meant that their planned approach route was compromised. The team would have to find an alternative path to the target compound, adding both time and complexity to an already challenging mission. Sarah found herself studying topographical features in the moonlight, looking for options that would allow them to bypass the security positions without exposing themselves to detection. There, she said finally, pointing toward a series of ridgelines that paralleled their original route. We can move along those high points and come down on the target from the northwest instead of the south. It's longer and steeper, but it avoids the observation posts. Webb evaluated Sarah's suggestion, checking it against his own tactical map and considering the implications for their timeline. The alternative route would add approximately 2 hours to their approach, but it would also provide better concealment and multiple escape routes if the mission went badly. Good thinking, Martinez. Adjust our movement plan and lead us around. The next several hours tested everyone's physical conditioning and mental resilience. Moving through high-altitude terrain in darkness while carrying full equipment loads pushed the team to their limits. Sarah found herself drawing on reserves of strength and endurance that she hadn't known she possessed. The modified route took them along ridgelines that offered spectacular views of the Afghan landscape, but also exposed them to cold mountain winds that cut through their gear. Sarah's knowledge of local weather patterns helped her anticipate when they would encounter the most challenging conditions, allowing the team to time their movement to minimize exposure. As they reached their final observation position overlooking the target compound, Sarah's role began to shift from navigator to intelligence gatherer. Using her understanding of logistics networks and supply patterns, she helped the team analyze what they were seeing in the valley below. The compound was larger than anticipated, with multiple buildings arranged around a central courtyard. Sarah counted vehicle signatures and identified what appeared to be a communications antenna that hadn't been visible in satellite photographs. More concerning, there were significantly more personnel moving around the compound than intelligence estimates had suggested. I count at least 20 individuals, Webb whispered as he studied the target through his scope. That's double what we expected. Sarah had been conducting her own analysis, focusing on the patterns of movement and the types of equipment visible in the compound. Chief, based on the vehicle types and the way they've organized their positions, I think we're looking at more than just local Taliban. Some of those movement patterns suggest military training. Her observation proved accurate when Dawn revealed the full scope of what they were facing. The compound housed not only the targeted Taliban commander, but also a group of foreign fighters who had brought sophisticated weapons and tactical expertise to the region. The mission had evolved from a relatively straightforward capture operation into something approaching a direct assault against a hardened position. Webb made the decision to establish an observation post and gather additional intelligence before proceeding with the assault. Sarah's logistical expertise became critical as the team prepared for an extended surveillance period that would require careful management of their water, food, and battery supplies. Martinez, calculate our consumption rates and determine how long we can maintain this position, Webb ordered. Sarah spread her notes on the ground and began working through the calculations. 6 people, elevated terrain that increased caloric requirements, cold weather that affected battery performance, and limited resupply options. Her analysis indicated that they could maintain effective operations for approximately 36 hours before resource limitations would force them to either execute the mission or abort. We have until tomorrow night, Sarah reported. After that, we'll need to move regardless of the tactical situation. The team spent the day conducting detailed surveillance of the compound, identifying guard positions, analyzing defensive preparations, and looking for weaknesses that could be exploited during an assault. Sarah contributed to this effort by applying her understanding of logistics to assess the enemy's supply situation and predict their likely responses to different tactical approaches. As evening approached, Webb made the decision to proceed with the mission despite the increased enemy presence. The intelligence value of the target was too significant to abandon, and waiting for additional forces would allow the Taliban commander to escape to another location. Here's how we're going to do this, Webb explained as the team gathered for final mission briefing. We move down after full darkness and establish assault positions around the compound perimeter. Martinez, you'll set up an overwatch position on that ridge where you can provide fire support and coordinate our extraction. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as Webb outlined her specific role in the assault. She would be positioned to cover the team's withdrawal route while also serving as their primary communication link with base for air support and medical evacuation if needed. It was a critical position that required both technical skill and combat effectiveness. Remember, Webb continued, the primary objective is to capture or eliminate the Taliban commander. Secondary objectives include gathering intelligence materials and neutralizing foreign fighter personnel. We execute on my signal and withdraw along predetermined routes. The team spent the remaining daylight hours preparing their equipment and reviewing contingency plans. Sarah double-checked her communication gear, confirmed her ammunition loads, and practiced the fire support procedures she might need to execute from her overwatch position. As darkness fell, Sarah found herself moving down the mountainside toward combat with a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Everything in her training had led toward this moment, but no amount of preparation could fully ready someone for their first experience under fire. The team reached their assault positions without detection, using Sarah's route planning to avoid the security posts they had identified during their reconnaissance. Webb positioned himself to assault the main building where the Taliban commander was believed to be located, while the other SEALs established positions to control the compound's exits and engage any fighters who attempted to escape. Sarah's overwatch position provided excellent visibility of the entire target area as well as the surrounding terrain where enemy reinforcements might appear. She established her shooting position with careful attention to fields of fire and cover from return fire, just as she had been taught during her abbreviated training period. The assault began at 0230 hours with the sound of explosions as the SEALs breached the compound's defenses. Sarah watched through her night vision scope as green-clad figures moved through the compound with deadly precision, clearing buildings and engaging enemy personnel who attempted to resist. Her first indication that the mission was not going according to plan came when she observed muzzle flashes from positions outside the compound perimeter. Enemy reinforcements were arriving from multiple directions, threatening to surround the SEAL team and cut off their withdrawal routes. "Chief, you've got company coming from the northeast," Sarah reported through her headset. "At least 6 fighters moving down from the hills." "Copy that, Martinez. Can you engage them from your position?" Sarah adjusted her scope and acquired targets on the enemy fighters who were moving toward the compound. Her first shots were precisely placed, dropping 2 fighters and forcing the others to seek cover behind rocks and vegetation. The engagement felt surreal, like an extension of the target practice she had conducted countless times, except now the targets were shooting back. The battle intensified rapidly as more enemy personnel emerged from positions throughout the valley. Sarah found herself engaging multiple groups of fighters while simultaneously coordinating with the assault team and calling for helicopter support from FOB Chapman. "Base, this is Overwatch," Sarah transmitted using the communication procedures she had memorized. "We are in contact at the target location. Request immediate close air support and prepare for casualty evacuation." The response from base indicated that helicopter support was en route, but would not arrive for another 20 minutes. The SEAL team would have to hold their position and complete their mission using only the resources they had carried with them. Sarah's position became increasingly important as the tactical situation developed. From her elevated observation point, she could see enemy movement that the assault team couldn't detect from ground level. Her warnings and fire support helped the SEALs avoid several potential ambushes while they completed their search of the compound. "Martinez, we've got the package," Webb reported, using code language to indicate that they had captured the Taliban commander. "Prepare to cover our withdrawal to Extraction Point Bravo." Sarah shifted her focus to providing covering fire as the SEAL team began moving toward their planned extraction location. Enemy fighters were converging on the compound from multiple directions, and the withdrawal would require fighting through several established positions. The next 30 minutes would test everything that Sarah had learned about herself and her capabilities. As the team moved through increasingly intense combat, she would discover that being a warrior wasn't about her job title or her official training. It was about making the right decisions under pressure and doing whatever was necessary to bring her teammates home safely. The Taliban commander proved to be exactly who intelligence had suspected, a regional coordinator responsible for planning attacks throughout eastern Afghanistan. His capture represented a significant victory for coalition forces, but getting him and the team safely back to base required fighting through an increasingly complex tactical situation. Sarah watched through her scope as the SEAL team began their withdrawal from the compound, moving in practiced formation while carrying their prisoner and recovered intelligence materials. Enemy fighters had established blocking positions along several potential escape routes, forcing Webb to choose between fighting through prepared defenses or finding alternative paths through unfamiliar terrain. Overwatch, this is Team Leader, Webb transmitted. We need alternate routes to Extraction Point Bravo. What do you see from your position? Sarah studied the terrain through her night vision equipment, looking for paths that would allow the team to avoid the heaviest enemy concentrations while still reaching their planned helicopter landing zone. Her months of route planning experience proved invaluable as she identified a series of ridgelines and valleys that could provide concealed movement. Team Leader, I've got a route that takes you north along the creek bed, then up through that saddle between the two peaks, Sarah reported. It adds distance, but avoids the blocking positions. Copy that. Guide us through. Sarah began providing detailed navigation instructions while simultaneously engaging enemy fighters who were trying to flank her Overwatch position. Her ability to multitask under pressure reflected both her training and her natural aptitude for maintaining focus during chaotic situations. The modified withdrawal route took the team through terrain that was challenging but offered better concealment than their original plan. Sarah's real-time navigation guidance helped them avoid several areas where loose rock could have created noise discipline problems or where natural choke points could have become deadly ambush sites. 20 minutes into the withdrawal, the tactical situation changed dramatically when enemy mortar rounds began impacting near Sarah's position. The Taliban fighters had identified her location and were attempting to eliminate the Overwatch support that was protecting the SEAL team's movement. Overwatch, you need to displace, Webb ordered. They've got your position targeted. Sarah had already reached the same conclusion and was preparing to move to an alternate firing position when she observed something that changed her priorities. A group of enemy fighters was moving to establish an ambush along the SEAL team's planned route, positioning themselves in a location where they could devastate the withdrawing operators. Team Leader, hold your movement, Sarah transmitted urgently. You've got 8 to 10 fighters setting up an ambush at grid reference 41, SMD 12345 67890. Sarah found herself facing a critical decision. She could displace to avoid the incoming mortar fire and preserve her own safety, but doing so would leave the SEAL team vulnerable to an ambush that could result in multiple casualties. Alternatively, she could remain in position long enough to neutralize the ambush threat, accepting increased personal risk to protect her teammates. The choice was actually simple. Sarah had volunteered for this mission to contribute to its success, and that meant accepting whatever risks were necessary to ensure that everyone made it home safely. She adjusted her position to get better angles on the enemy ambush site and began engaging targets with the methodical precision that had characterized her shooting throughout her military career. Her first shots disrupted the enemy's positioning, forcing several fighters to abandon their planned ambush locations and seek cover in less advantageous positions. Sarah continued engaging targets while mortar rounds impacted increasingly close to her location, showering her with dirt and rock fragments that made accurate shooting more challenging. Martinez, get out of there, Kowalski shouted through the radio. That's a direct order. Negative, Sarah replied calmly while adjusting her scope for another shot. I can break up this ambush, but I need another 2 minutes. Those 2 minutes felt like hours as Sarah methodically engaged the enemy fighters while incoming mortar rounds crept closer to her position. Her shooting remained accurate despite the stress and distraction, reflecting both natural ability and the countless hours she had spent on rifle ranges throughout her military career. The final mortar round impacted less than 20 meters from Sarah's position, close enough that the blast wave knocked her flat and temporarily disrupted her hearing. As she struggled to regain her bearings, she realized that her communication equipment had been damaged and that she had lost contact with the SEAL team. Working purely on instinct and training, Sarah gathered her essential equipment and began moving toward the SEAL team's last known position. Without radio communication, she couldn't coordinate her movement with theirs, which created the risk of a friendly fire incident if she encountered them unexpectedly. The terrain between Sarah's damaged Overwatch position and the SEAL team's withdrawal route was steep and rocky, requiring careful movement to avoid injury while carrying full equipment loads. Sarah's physical conditioning served her well as she covered the distance quickly despite the challenging conditions. She caught up with the SEAL team just as they were encountering the remnants of the enemy ambush force that she had disrupted. The Taliban fighters who had survived her shooting were now engaged in a running firefight with Webb's operators, using the mountainous terrain to avoid decisive engagement while slowing the team's progress toward their extraction point. Sarah's arrival coincided with a moment when the tactical situation was becoming critical. Petty Officer Rodriguez had been wounded by enemy fire and needed immediate medical attention, but the team couldn't establish a secure position for treatment while under continuous harassment from pursuing fighters. Without functioning radio communication, Sarah couldn't coordinate her actions with the team's overall plan. Instead, she had to read the tactical situation and determine how best to contribute based on what she could observe directly. She positioned herself to provide covering fire while the team's medic worked on Rodriguez's wounds, engaging enemy fighters who were attempting to close distance on their position. Her shooting was accurate and effective, forcing the pursuers to maintain greater distance while the wounded SEAL received treatment. "Martinez," Webb shouted over the sound of gunfire. "Can you establish communication with base?" Sarah checked her damaged radio equipment and discovered that while her primary communication system was destroyed, she still had a functional backup radio that operated on different frequencies. Within minutes, she had re-established contact with FOB Chapman and was coordinating helicopter support for the team's extraction. "Base, this is Overwatch on backup frequency," Sarah transmitted. "We need immediate casualty evacuation at grid reference 41 SMD 15678 90123. One wounded, requires urgent medical attention." The response from base indicated that helicopter support was en route and would arrive at the extraction point within 15 minutes. However, the SEAL team's current position was still nearly a mile from the landing zone, and they would have to cover that distance while carrying a wounded teammate and fighting through enemy contact. Sarah's logistical training became critical as the team organized their movement to the extraction point. She helped redistribute equipment loads to account for Rodriguez's injury, calculated movement times based on terrain difficulty, and identified positions where they could establish temporary security during the withdrawal. The movement to the extraction point required fighting through 2 more enemy positions and crossing terrain that was exposed to observation from multiple directions. Sarah found herself functioning as both a combatant and a coordinator, engaging targets when necessary while helping to manage the team's movement and communication requirements. Her performance during these final phases of the mission impressed even the experienced SEALs who had initially doubted her capabilities. She demonstrated not only technical competence with weapons and communication equipment, but also the kind of tactical judgment that typically required years of combat experience to develop. As they approached the extraction point, Sarah noticed that the helicopter landing zone showed signs of recent enemy activity. Footprints in the soft earth and disturbed vegetation suggested that Taliban fighters had anticipated the team's withdrawal route and might have established positions to attack the rescue helicopter. "Chief, the LZ might be compromised," Sarah reported. "I'm seeing indicators of recent enemy presence." Webb made the decision to establish a security perimeter around the landing zone and conduct a careful reconnaissance before allowing the helicopter to approach. Sarah's observation had potentially saved the aircraft and crew from an ambush that could have resulted in additional casualties. The reconnaissance revealed that enemy fighters had indeed attempted to establish positions near the landing zone, but they had withdrawn when the helicopter's approach became audible. The extraction proceeded without further incident, with all team members and their prisoners successfully evacuated to FOB Chapman. As the helicopter lifted off from the mountain landing zone, Sarah found herself looking back at the terrain where she had experienced her first combat operation. The landscape looked peaceful in the early morning light, giving no indication of the intense fighting that had occurred there just hours earlier. She had volunteered for the mission as a supply clerk who wanted to contribute her specialized knowledge to a critical operation. She was returning as a combat veteran who had proven herself under the most demanding circumstances possible. The transformation had occurred not through any dramatic moment of revelation, but through a series of decisions to do whatever was necessary to support her teammates and accomplish the mission. Rodriguez's wounds proved to be serious, but not life-threatening, and he was stable by the time they reached the base medical facility. The captured Taliban commander provided valuable intelligence that led to several follow-up operations against enemy networks throughout the region. The mission was considered a significant success by every measure. But, for Sarah, the most important outcome was simpler and more personal. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she hadn't known existed, and she had earned the respect of professionals whose opinions she valued. The experience had changed her understanding of what she might accomplish in military service and in life generally. Chief Webb found Sarah in the supply office the next morning, working on routine inventory tasks as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She looked up from her paperwork with a slight smile when he approached her desk. "Martinez, I've been thinking about our conversation before the mission," Webb said. "You mentioned interest in different military career paths. Have you given any more thought to what you might want to do next?" Sarah set down her pen and considered the question. The previous night's experiences had clarified many things for her, but they had also raised new questions about possibilities she had never seriously considered. "Chief, I've learned that I'm capable of more than I thought," she replied. "I'm interested in exploring opportunities that would let me contribute to operations like the one we just completed. Maybe something in special operations support, or reconnaissance, or intelligence analysis." Webb nodded approvingly. "Those are all possibilities worth exploring. But I've got another suggestion that you might want to consider." Sarah waited expectantly for Webb to continue. "Have you ever thought about trying out for a special operations unit yourself? Not necessarily SEALs, but there are other opportunities for someone with your skills and demonstrated performance. Critical skills operator, special operations forces support activity, maybe even Marine special operations." The suggestion surprised Sarah, not because it was unreasonable, but because it represented possibilities that she had never seriously imagined for herself. Her military career had begun with modest goals and conventional expectations. The events of the past few weeks had revealed potential that she was only beginning to understand. "I'd like to learn more about those opportunities," Sarah said thoughtfully. "But first, I want to make sure I understand what last night really means. I want to know whether what happened was an anomaly or an indication of capabilities that I can develop further." Webb smiled at her measured response. "Martinez, what happened last night wasn't luck or an anomaly. You performed under pressure because you have the kind of character and competence that effective operators require. The question now is whether you want to develop those capabilities further." As Sarah returned to her supply duties, she found herself thinking about possibilities that would have seemed impossible just a few weeks earlier. She had begun as a supply clerk who wanted to contribute to important missions. She had discovered that contribution could take many forms, and that the most important qualification for any job was the willingness to do whatever was necessary to get it done right. 3 months after the mountain operation, Sarah found herself standing in front of a different kind of challenge. The Marine Corps Special Operations Command Evaluation Board consisted of 3 officers and 2 senior enlisted Marines who would determine whether she qualified for the Critical Skills Operator program. Her performance during the SEAL mission had opened doors, but she would need to prove herself all over again through an entirely different selection process. The recommendation letter from Chief Webb had been instrumental in getting her this opportunity. His detailed account of Sarah's performance during the mountain operation had impressed Marine Corps leadership and resulted in an invitation to attempt selection for one of the Corps' most demanding programs. "Lance Corporal Martinez," the board president began, "your record shows exceptional performance in logistics operations, but very limited combat experience prior to the mission described in Chief Webb's recommendation. What makes you believe you're ready for special operations training?" Sarah had anticipated this question and had given considerable thought to how she would answer it. "Sir, I believe the mission demonstrated that I possessed the fundamental characteristics required for special operations. The ability to think clearly under pressure, the willingness to accept risk in order to accomplish objectives, and the capacity to perform effectively as part of a small team in challenging circumstances. She paused briefly before continuing. I also believe that my background in logistics provides perspective that could be valuable in special operations contexts. Understanding how to sustain operations in austere environments, how to plan for contingencies, and how to manage resources efficiently are skills that apply to many different mission types. The questioning continued for another hour, covering Sarah's motivations, her understanding of special operations requirements, and her assessment of her own strengths and weaknesses. The board members were thorough and professional, but Sarah could sense they were trying to determine whether she was genuinely qualified or simply benefiting from temporary media attention surrounding the SEAL mission. The physical evaluation that followed was deliberately designed to test candidates beyond their normal limits. Sarah found herself completing obstacle courses, carrying heavy loads over long distances, and performing complex tasks while exhausted. Her soccer background and months of military training served her well, but the intensity was unlike anything she had previously experienced. More challenging than the physical requirements were the psychological evaluations designed to assess how candidates responded to stress, uncertainty, and moral complexity. Sarah faced scenario-based questions that required making difficult decisions with limited information and accepting responsibility for outcomes that might result in casualties or mission failure. The selection process lasted 2 weeks and eliminated approximately 70% of the candidates who had been invited to participate. Sarah survived each cut, not because she was the strongest or the fastest, but because she consistently demonstrated the kind of judgment and character that special operations units required. On the final day of evaluation, Sarah received notification that she had been selected for the Critical Skills Operator Training Pipeline. The achievement represented validation of everything she had discovered about herself during the mountain operation, but it also marked the beginning of a journey that would require months of additional training and preparation. The training itself proved to be transformational in ways that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Beyond learning advanced tactical skills, she found herself studying languages, cultural dynamics, and political situations that would affect special operations missions around the world. The program was designed to produce operators who could think strategically as well as tactically. Sarah excelled in areas that drew on her analytical abilities and attention to detail. Mission planning, intelligence analysis, and logistics coordination came naturally to her, building on skills she had developed during her supply career. The tactical training was more challenging, but her performance during the mountain mission had given her confidence in her ability to function effectively under pressure. 6 months into the training program, Sarah received unexpected news that would affect her long-term career plans. Chief Webb, who had been reassigned to a training command in Virginia, contacted her with information about a joint special operations unit that was looking for personnel with her specific combination of skills. "Martinez, there's an opportunity that might interest you," Webb explained during their phone conversation. "It's a joint unit that conducts complex operations requiring both tactical proficiency and specialized technical knowledge. They're specifically looking for people who understand logistics, can operate in small teams, and have demonstrated combat effectiveness." The unit Webb described was involved in missions that required infiltrating denied areas, gathering intelligence, and conducting operations that supported larger strategic objectives. Personnel needed to be capable of operating independently for extended periods while maintaining communication with higher headquarters and coordinating with conventional forces when necessary. "What makes you think I'd be a good fit for something like that?" Sarah asked. "Because you've already proven that you can do it," Webb replied. "The mountain operation required exactly those kinds of skills. You navigated unfamiliar terrain, managed complex logistics under pressure, maintained communication with multiple elements, and contributed to tactical operations when circumstances required it." Sarah found herself intrigued by the possibility, but also realistic about her qualifications. "Chief, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm still in the middle of CSO training. I haven't even completed the basic curriculum yet." "That's actually an advantage," Webb explained. This unit prefers people who haven't been programmed by years of conventional special operations training. They want operators who can think creatively and adapt to situations that don't fit standard tactical models. The conversation with Webb prompted Sarah to reflect on how much her perspective on military service had changed since arriving in Afghanistan as a supply clerk. She had begun with modest goals and conventional expectations, but experiences had revealed possibilities that she never could have imagined when she first enlisted. Her father's reaction to news of her selection for special operations training had been characteristically understated, but profoundly supportive. "Mija, I always knew you had it in you," he had said during one of their weekly phone calls. "The question was never whether you were tough enough or smart enough. The question was whether you would get the opportunity to show what you could do." Sarah's mother had been more concerned about the increased dangers associated with special operations assignments, but she had also expressed pride in her daughter's achievements. "Just remember that your job is to come home safely," she had said. "Everything else is secondary to that." As Sarah progressed through her training, she found herself thinking frequently about the other Marines she had served with at FOB Chapman. Rodriguez had recovered fully from his wounds and had been reassigned to a training command where he was teaching other Marines about combat operations. Thompson had completed her deployment and was using her military benefits to attend agricultural school in preparation for buying a farm. Sarah maintained contact with both of them, sharing updates about her training and hearing about their own career developments. Their friendship had been strengthened by shared experiences in Afghanistan, and they provided perspective that helped Sarah maintain balance as she navigated increasingly demanding professional challenges. The final phase of CSO training included a capstone exercise designed to test everything candidates had learned about special operations procedures, decision-making under pressure, and working effectively with minimal supervision. Sarah's scenario involved infiltrating a simulated enemy-held area, gathering specific intelligence, and coordinating with conventional forces to complete a larger mission objective. The exercise drew on all the skills Sarah had developed over the previous months, but it also required her to apply lessons learned during the mountain operation with Chief Webb's SEAL team. She found herself relying on navigation techniques, communication procedures, and tactical judgment that had been refined through actual combat experience. Her performance during the capstone exercise confirmed what instructors had observed throughout the training program. Sarah possessed a rare combination of technical competence, tactical awareness, and leadership potential that made her particularly well-suited for complex special operations missions. Upon completion of CSO training, Sarah was promoted to corporal and received orders to report to a classified unit whose mission requirements matched the opportunities that Chief Webb had described months earlier. The assignment would involve extensive additional training, but it would also provide opportunities to apply her skills in operational contexts that she found intellectually challenging and professionally rewarding. As Sarah prepared to leave the training environment and begin her new assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from supply clerk to special operations Marine. The transformation hadn't occurred through any single dramatic event, but through a series of decisions to accept challenges that tested her capabilities and revealed potential she hadn't known existed. The most important lesson she had learned was that competence and courage weren't limited to people with specific job titles or traditional backgrounds. They could be found in anyone willing to do whatever was necessary to support their teammates and accomplish important objectives. Sarah's story became something of a legend within the special operations community, not because it was unique, but because it illustrated principles that effective operators understood instinctively. Success in challenging environments depended more on character and adaptability than on formal credentials or conventional preparation. Chief Webb, who had taken a considerable professional risk by including Sarah in the mountain operation, later said that his decision had been based on simple logic. Martinez had demonstrated the fundamental qualities we needed for mission success. Everything else was just training and experience that could be developed over time. Years later, when Sarah had become a senior special operations Marine responsible for training new operators, she would often tell her students that their most important qualification was not their previous experience or their technical skills. It was their willingness to commit fully to mission success and to support their teammates regardless of circumstances. The young Marines who heard these briefings would sometimes ask Sarah about her transition from supply clerk to Special Operations Marine, wondering whether such dramatic career changes were realistic for someone in their position. Her answer was always the same. Your current job title doesn't define what you're capable of accomplishing. Your character and commitment do. Sarah's career eventually included deployments to multiple countries, participation in operations that contributed to significant strategic objectives, and leadership positions that allowed her to influence how special operations units developed and trained their personnel. She earned advanced degrees in international relations and strategic studies, wrote professional articles about special operations logistics, and served as an advisor to senior military commanders planning complex operations. But when she looked back on her military career, Sarah always considered the mountain operation with Chief Webb's SEAL team to be the most important mission she had ever completed. Not because of its strategic significance or its operational complexity, but because it had taught her that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they committed themselves fully to objectives larger than their own comfort or safety. The supply clerk who had volunteered for a dangerous mission because she believed she could contribute to its success had discovered that contribution could take many forms, and that the most important qualification for any challenge was the willingness to do whatever was necessary to meet it successfully. Sarah's story continued to inspire Marines and other service members who found themselves wondering whether they possessed capabilities that went beyond their official assignments. Her example demonstrated that courage and competence could emerge from the most unexpected places when circumstances demanded exceptional responses from seemingly ordinary people. In the end, Sarah Martinez had proven that being a warrior wasn't about your job description or your official training. It was about making the right decisions when others depended on you, accepting responsibility for outcomes that mattered, and committing yourself fully to objectives that were larger than your own immediate interests. The Marine Corps had given Sarah the opportunity to discover what she was capable of accomplishing. In return, she had given the Corps a lifetime of service that exemplified the values and standards that made American military forces effective in the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Her legacy lived on in the Marines she trained, the operations she supported, and the example she provided that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary results when they possessed the character and commitment that true leadership required. The supply clerk from El Paso had become exactly what her father had always known she could be, a Marine who made a difference when it mattered most.